Dawn came slow to the town of Colton Ridge. The sky turned from black to iron before anyone noticed. A thin light crept across the desert and touched the edge of the street, where 14 men stood in a circle around a single figure. The cold had teeth at this hour, the kind of cold that finds every gap in wool and settles there. Nobody had called for them. Nobody had gathered them. They had come one by one through the cold hours before first light. 14 men with 14 reasons and one shared certainty. The stranger sat on a crate outside the old feed store. His hands rested on his knees. He did not move. He had been sitting there since well before midnight, watching them arrive, counting them, saying nothing. Colton Ridge had 300 people and no sheriff worth the name. The last lawman had left in October. Since then, the territory had learned to manage itself. Most days that meant looking away. The stranger had come to Colton Ridge 7 days before. He arrived on a gray horse that never needed urging. He left $2 at the livery for a night's stable. He asked for nothing else. By the second day, the 14 had heard. By the third, they had met. By the fifth, they had agreed. The stranger was not from the territory. He had no stake here. Whatever he had come to do, it would not stand. The circle was deliberate. 7 men formed the outer ring with rifles at 40 paces. They were the fence, the guarantee. If the stranger ran, they would cut him down. 4 men formed the inner arc with shotguns and revolvers at 20 paces. These were the ones who believed it would be quick. They had names that people remembered and fists that people feared. They had done the work of men like Hogg for 3 years now. Burned barns, poisoned wells, carried men into the desert and left them where the coyotes would finish the conversation. They believed they knew what a man was worth and what a man could do. They were about to learn otherwise. 3 men stood at the center, nearest the stranger. These were the ones who had agreed to finish it. They had done this before. Not 14 on one, but enough. The 14th man stood apart. His name was Hogg. He owned half the grazing land outside town and all of the silence inside it. He did not touch his gun. He watched. He had learned that the man who pulls the trigger carries the weight. He preferred to point. The stranger looked at the circle and measured it the way a man reads weather before a ride. He noted the 7 with rifles and the gaps between them. He noted the 4 with shotguns and the angle of their bodies, the slight lean forward that meant they were already committed to moving. He noted the 3 in front who believed this was already over. He noted Hogg, who had chosen not to stand close. A man who calls a circle but does not step into it is a man who knows the difference between power and force. The cold settled deeper as the sky brightened. Waiting was its own kind of violence. The stranger had sat in worse places. He had learned that waiting is not passive. Waiting is a decision to stay still when every nerve says move. He had come to Colton Ridge for a woman named Ada Lott. 3 years ago, her husband Samuel had refused to sell his land to Hogg. 2 men had come in the night. Samuel had gone to meet them with a lantern and nothing else. He did not believe they would actually do it. That was his mistake. The widow still lived in the house on the eastern ridge. She still worked the field herself. She had not sold. Not when they burned her north barn. Not when they poisoned her water. Not when a man rode to her door 2 weeks ago and told her she would sign the papers by the 1st of the month, or she would not be signing anything at all. She had written a letter to a priest in the next valley. She did not ask for help. She only asked that someone remember her husband and tell his story if anything happened. The letter traveled slowly at first, passed hand to hand through the territory the way all news eventually does. It found its way to the wrong hands, and the wrong hands passed it further. Some things cannot be hidden once they are written down. Somehow it reached the stranger. He had not promised anything. He did not make promises. He simply rode. On the 6th day, he had sat across from Hogg in the saloon. He placed a single cartridge on the table between them. Then he walked out. Hogg gathered his 14. Now the morning had come. The stranger knew the geometry of the circle. He knew which men had done this before, and which had been promised they would not have to do much. He knew the 3 in front believed they were the ones who would end it. He knew the 7 in back were there because they feared what would happen if they were not. Fear is not courage, but it holds a circle together. The stranger did not look at Hogg again. Hogg was not the problem. Hogg was the result of the problem. The problem was that 300 people had decided looking away was cheaper than looking back. He stood up from the crate. His hands came away from his knees. He did not reach for his revolvers. Not yet. He waited. There is a moment in every confrontation that comes before the violence, when the air changes, when men who were certain become men who are only pretending to be certain. The stranger had lived in that moment more times than he could count. The 3 men in front tensed. Their fingers found the butts of their guns. The stranger watched their eyes. He watched the way weight shifted in their boots. He watched the moment a man decides to move before his body agrees. That is the tell. That is what separates a man who is killed from a man who has only imagined it. The first one moved. A man named Burke. He drew fast, the way men do when they think speed is the only thing that matters. He was pulling the revolver from the holster when the stranger's shot took him in the center of the chest. The sound opened the morning like a door being broken down. The second man, Coyle, was already moving when Burke's body hit the ground. He got his gun level. He did not get it fired. The stranger's second shot took him in the throat. The four with shotguns opened fire. The stranger dropped low and moved left. He did not run. Running invites pursuit. He moved at an angle that kept the bodies of Burke and Coyle between him and the shotgunners. Bodies make cover. Bodies make men hesitate. Birdshot tore through the space where he had been. Splinters flew from the crate behind him. He did not feel the piece of wood that struck his cheek. He came up firing. One of the shotgunners, Dunn, went down with a bullet through the shoulder. The stranger had chosen the shoulder because Dunn was the youngest, the least committed, the one whose eyes kept flicking to the street behind him. A man planning his retreat does not need to die. The stranger was already turning. The third man in the inner arc had his revolver out and was jerking the trigger, sending rounds wide. The stranger shot him in the hip. The man went down and the gun clattered across the dirt. The seven with rifles finally moved. The stranger heard the crack of the first rifle and felt the wind of the bullet past his ear. Close. Too close. The man at the north end of the ring had aimed for the head and missed by less than 6 inches. The stranger pivoted and fired twice into the group. One man fell, clutching his thigh. The other 6 scattered behind the stone facade of the feed store. They had planned for this. Stone 3 feet thick would stop most things. The stranger did not follow. He knew that a man behind stone is a man who has traded mobility for safety. He gave them neither. He closed the gap at an angle that kept the building's corner between him and the muzzle flash. Another rifle shot punched through the wooden facade above his shoulder. The stranger fired back without breaking stride. He heard a cry from behind the corner. He did not stop to confirm. He moved along the front of the store. He heard the shuffle of feet, the curse of a man who had lost his footing. He came around the corner at a crouch and fired before they could reposition. One man caught a round in the arm. Another took it in the leg and went down screaming. The others broke and ran toward the eastern edge of town. The stranger did not pursue. A man who runs is a man who will not come back. The 14 had been 14. Now they were fewer. That was enough. The street was quiet now. Dust hung in the morning light like something suspended between breaths. The stranger's boots left prints in the dirt where Burke's blood had begun to darken. He moved through the scene the way a man moves through a room he has visited before and knows he will not visit again. Dunn was trying to stand, the shotgun in his good hand. The stranger shot the weapon out of his grip. Dunn fell backward into the man behind him. The last shotgunner raised his gun. The stranger's shot took him in the chest. The last shotgunner dropped his weapon and ran. The stranger watched him disappear around the corner. He did not shoot him in the back. There was no honor in that. There was no use. The 3 men in front were down, 2 dead, 1 wounded, his face gray with the understanding that he would never work the way he had worked before. The 7 with rifles had scattered or were down. The 4 shotgunners were finished. Hogg was still standing apart, his hand resting on his revolver without drawing it. He had not moved through the entire fight. He had seen what the stranger could do. The stranger walked toward him. Hogg's hand drifted toward his holster, the kind of gesture a man makes when he wants to believe he still has a choice. The stranger shot him in the hand. Hogg fell to his knees, cradling the ruined fingers. Blood ran between them onto the dirt. The stranger walked past him without stopping. He did not look at Hogg's face. He had seen that face before in places where men believed land ownership was the same as owning the people who lived on it. He sat back down on the crate. He collected the spent shell casings from the ground and dropped them into his pocket. He straightened his coat. He adjusted his hat. He sat with his hands on his knees and waited for the town to wake. The blood on his cheek had dried to a dark crust. He did not wipe it away. Some marks are left to remind a man where he has been. The morning continued to brighten. Somewhere, a child began to cry. He walked to the livery. The gray horse was where he had left it. He let it out and mounted. He rode east, toward the ridge, toward the house where Ada Lot lived. He did not look back. Ada Lot was in her garden when he arrived. She was on her knees in the dirt, her hands deep in the soil. She looked up. She saw the gray horse. She saw the man on it, his coat darker than it had been, his hat pulled low. She did not ask if it was finished. She stood and brushed the dirt from her knees. The stranger dismounted and tied the horse to the post. Hogg would not be sending anyone else. He did not say this. He did not say anything. She looked at him for a long moment. She could see the dried blood on his sleeve. She could see the new holes in his coat. She did not ask his name. She knew better. "Will you stay?" she said. The stranger looked at the house, the garden, the well her husband had dug. He looked at the eastern ridge and the land beyond it. "No," he said. She nodded. She had not expected anything else. He mounted the horse. The saddle leather creaked. He touched the horse with his heels and moved north, toward the next town that had forgotten what justice looked like. "The debt is paid," he said. Then he was gone. Ada watched until he was a dot on the horizon. Then she turned back to her garden and knelt in the dirt again. Colton Ridge woke to silence. The street was empty except for the bodies. 14 men had come before dawn. By the time the sun was fully up, the number who could stand had dwindled to 4, and those 4 had already vanished into the country like smoke. The town did not speak of what happened. It had never been a town that spoke of things. It had survived by the practice of silence, by the understanding that what was not said could not be held against you. But silence has a weight, and after a time it becomes heavier than speech. By mid-morning, a deputy from a town 2 days' ride away had been summoned. He arrived by evening and stood in the center of the street and looked at what was left. He asked questions no one could answer. 14 men lay in the hard light of morning. Some were dead, some were not. The ones who could walk had already gone. By mid-morning, a deputy from a town 2 days' ride away had been summoned. He arrived by evening and stood in the center of the street and looked at what was left. He asked questions no one could answer. Who did this? The people of Colton Ridge looked at each other. They looked at Hogg's empty house on the western ridge. They looked at the stranger's crate, still sitting outside the feed store. They did not have a name. They did not have a description that agreed with the next man's. Tall, short, thin, broad, dark coat, brown coat, no coat, hat, no hat. The deputy wrote it all down and put the notebook away. He had seen this before. Not often, but enough. Enough to know that some men come into a town like a storm and leave the same way. He asked if anyone had seen the stranger's face. Nobody had. He asked if anyone knew his name. Nobody did. He asked if anyone knew why he had come. Silence. Then an old woman, the one who ran the boarding house on the corner, said, "He came for Ada Lot." That was all. For years after, men who had been in that circle would cross the stranger's path in other towns, in other territories. They would see him from a distance, or they would hear his name mentioned, and each time they would remember the feeling of standing in that cold circle before the sun came up, the feeling of being certain and then not, the feeling of a gun in your hand and no clear idea what to do with it. The deputy wrote it all down and put the notebook away. He had seen this before. Then an old woman, the one who ran the boarding house on the corner, said, "He came for Ada Lot." That was all. In the weeks that followed, Ada Lot's land was not burned. Her water was not poisoned. No one rode to her door with threats. She farmed the East Ridge until the following autumn. Then she sold a portion of it to a family from the valley and kept the house and the garden and the view of the open country. The new family had 3 children. They called her grandmother without asking permission. She did not correct them. She never spoke of the stranger. But sometimes, when riders came through on the northern road, she would stop her work and watch until she could see clearly. She never expected to recognize the man on the gray horse. She only wanted to see the shape of him, moving through the country the way weather moves, silent and inevitable and unnamed, going somewhere she would never know, doing what she would never understand, leaving the way he had come, without a word, without a name, without anything but the quiet fact of his passing and what it had cost.